How has the Dynasty game changed over the past 8 years? We're talking about that and a lot more on today's episode of Locked On Dynasty.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Matt Williamson and Ryan McDowell.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by the Game Time app. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. I'm your host, Ryan McDowell. You can follow me on Twitter at RyanMC23. Joining me, as always, is former NFL scout Matt Williamson. Find Matt on Twitter at WilliamsonNFL. Well, Matt, here we go. I mentioned this on Twitter earlier today, and as Matt always likes to do, we'll pull back the curtain a little bit here. It is Tuesday evening, December 26th.
Day after
and
Christmas.
I mentioned, day after Christmas. I hope you had a good one, Matt. But I mentioned this earlier on Twitter. Possibly a lot of you have already seen this, but this is going to be my final episode of Locked On Dynasty. Matt, you reached out to me in January of 2016. You had parted ways with ESPN. You had done I believe, a daily podcast there. And at that time, you were really getting into the Dynasty fantasy space. We had become acquaintances through Dynasty and had traded some messages. And you wanted to keep doing a podcast. And specifically, you wanted to do a Dynasty podcast. And I was certainly honored when you reached out to me. I did not have a podcast of my own at that time, which feels a little crazy because I think I've had 5 or 6 different ones since that time. But I've mentioned this on other shows. I've probably mentioned it on here as well. This is not really my comfort zone. This is not where I feel comfortable necessarily behind the mic, but this is where I've been for nearly 8 years now. It actually took a little bit of time for me to decide if I was going to take this ride with you, and obviously eventually decided to do it. And I mean, this might be overselling it a little bit, Matt, but it changed my life. It really did. Opened up a lot of doors. Was certainly a fun ride with you. We've become very good friends, in my opinion, at least. Gotten to meet up a few times in real life, but sometimes real life just takes over, and that's the case here. So, mentioned this on Twitter. I will be stepping away effective at the end of this episode, actually. And there's not bigger or better. I'm just taking a little bit of a step back. I will still be doing work, written content and podcast work over at Dynasty League Football. Certainly encourage you to check that out. You can still hear my thoughts there if you want to hear me on a podcast. But this is going to be the end, Matt. We tried to do the math, but we're both pretty bad at math. It looks like this is close to episode 600 for us. It looks like we're just going to miss 600. But since January of 2016, we've done nearly 600 episodes, and possibly if you're a newer listener, you might not remember the Dynasty Blueprint days, but the first 227 episodes of our time together were under the title Dynasty Blueprint. We made the move over here to Locked On Dynasty. We're able to bring you 4 or 5 shows a week, of course, with the help of our friends Kate and Marcus. Matt, sounds like it's over 20,000 hours that we have spent together minutes. Yeah, sorry. that would be a whole nother experience. Over 20,000 minutes that we have spent together talking Dynasty fantasy football. It's been a great ride, and I just want to say thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks for
inviting me along.
Yeah, very cool. It has been a great run. First off, you mentioned this on Twitter. The responses have been overwhelmingly sentimental and cool, and very appreciate all of you out there. Just to keep pulling back the curtain, to be honest with you, I mean, Ryan drives the show. He writes all the agendas. He does all the technical stuff. His wonderful wife edits everything. I mean, like, without any of that, none of this would have ever happened, going back to the Blueprint days. And I was fortunate enough to be at ESPN for 10 years. And I remember early on there, I went to the fantasy folks and said, hey, I play fantasy. I think I could help you guys out with fantasy. And they said, Matt, you are a scout in the NFL. That's so beneath you. You're not doing fantasy. Are you crazy?
No.
I mean, this was like the beginning years of Matthew Berry and when I was doing Football Today podcast. And, about halfway through, maybe year 6 or so, they started letting me fiddle with fantasy. And I would go to the fantasy summits every year. And I think there was 11 of us that would vote on, the rankings that everyone used, from the magazines and all that stuff, which was an awesome experience. And then when they let me go, I was like, man, I want to do some Dynasty stuff. I would actually write an article or two for ESPN.com with Dynasty. And that was unheard of at the time. That was my idea. Mm-hmm. And Ryan was my first thought. I'm like, who could be my co-host to knock this out? And it worked out really, really well. I mean, the Dynasty Blueprint stuff didn't start out like gangbusters. You had to build up our followers. And then another endeavor I took on at the time was the Locked On Network back then was only basketball, so they asked me to be the first football host of any kind on the Locked On Network. And it was Locked On NFL, just me in my basement every day. And then that eventually turned into Peacock and Williamson just for formatting reasons and whatnot. But, we had a good relationship with them and they took us under, and it's been good. It's been really good. And so no complaints with, Ryan and I aren't breaking up. We don't have any problems with the Locked On Network or any of those things. It's been a wonderful ride. And hey, I mentioned I was at ESPN for 10 years. That was longer than most, and we've been doing this for 8, which is a heck of a run. And I hope we've, won some people some money, taught some people some things, maybe got a laugh out of people here and there,
I certainly hope so. And again, you mentioned the responses on Twitter. Some of the questions that came up were regarding what the future of the show is. Mm-hmm. Well, what we know for sure is Kate and Marcus are not going anywhere. You can hear them the rest of this week on Locked On Dynasty, and you can certainly hear them moving forward. And to be totally transparent, Matt, I'm not sure if you know what you're going to do. Is that fair?
That's fair. I mean, again, this is the day after Christmas. I think you told me this probably on the 23rd. It was right before the holiday. And needless to say needless to say, there was tons of games and tons of festivities and family. And first off, I hope everyone had a great holiday. I did. I hope you did too, of course, Ryan and your family. So I haven't had a lot of time to talk about it or figure out what I'm going to do. And again, pulling back the curtain, this is my 9th show of the day. So in some way, shape, or form, either Steelers or local radio or whatever, or Peacock and Williamson. And I'm leaning towards probably walking away myself because Ryan's my guy. If I'm going to talk Dynasty, there's really only one person I really want to do it with. And it doesn't mean that I'll never do it again or anything like that. But I've had so many other responsibilities this season, do a lot more Steelers stuff for Steelers.com, that it's been hard to find the time. And I love doing it, but I'm leaning towards walking away. But I'm going to give it a couple of days just to think it over and get out of the holiday season a little bit.
Well, I certainly encourage you, no matter what Locked On Dynasty looks like moving forward, certainly encourage you to continue listening. It's going to be great content from Kate and Marcus, possibly from Matt as well, and really the entire team over at Locked On will continue to roll out great content as they always do. Matt, we're not going to talk about ourselves the entire time. Let's push that aside a little bit. I did think with this change, I thought it was a good time to look back. As I said, we started this thing in January of 2016, and in those nearly 8 years, a lot has changed in the Dynasty space. And I want to talk about some of those things, and we're going to start that conversation next.
Folks, as the weather gets colder, the NFL offers stay hot at FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. So go look at this upcoming week, see what the biggest spread is, bet on the favor for $5, and you get $150. I mean, it's the best deal going. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is super easy to use. I use it all the time, and I'm not very technically sound. All kinds of betting options, over-unders, player props, futures, spreads. I mean, all the awards you can bet on, who's going to win the Super Bowl, stuff like that. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Matt, let's go back to January of 2016 and talk about how some things in the dynasty space have changed over that year, over those years. What's the first thing that comes to mind for you, just as far as how is dynasty different now versus back then?
Well, you guys at DLF have a lot to do with this, but the first thing that came to mind is it's much more mainstream now. I mean, there's much more technology, apps, sites to go to, more experts in the space. There wasn't many back then. It doesn't seem like that long ago. It's gone fast because it's been fun, but there's so many more resources for me, you, just the average, dynasty player that, isn't doing this for a living or is, kind of just on the side like everybody in the world.
More casual. Yeah,
exactly. That's the word I was looking for. So that's the first one that came to mind for me.
Well, Matt, you know me very well by now. When I'm talking about dynasty fantasy football, very often I'm citing ADP as a resource and as something to really dig into. So I thought it would be interesting to go back to January 2016 ADP and see what that looked like. Now, if you remember, Matt, we had the strong wide receiver class from 2014. And leading up to 2014, we had started to see wide receivers climb up the ADP. Guys like Calvin Johnson, AJ Green, Julio Jones, Antonio Brown, right? They had started to move up the board. And then that 2017, the 2014 wide receivers. Yes, 2014 wide receivers really changed everything. Of course, we're talking OBJ,
Mike Evans.
You're right. Mike Evans, some players that we're still valuing at a very high level. So around the time when we were starting this in early 2016, it was a wide receiver, just a plethora of wide receivers. And I looked at the first round of January 2016 ADP. It's on DLF. You can go check it out if you're a subscriber there. 0 quarterbacks, of course, in the first round. Only 2 running backs. Any ideas who they might have been, Matt? 2 running backs, 2016 first rounders.
Wow. I'm bad at that. I'm not even going to try to guess.
Let me guess. Let me give you a hint. One of them you should definitely get. 2016, a very good running back.
I think I know both of them. Lev Bell, David Johnson.
Okay, you got one. Lev Bell.
Okay.
Lev Bell's in there. He was the RB2. Todd Gurley was the running back one. Todd Gurley, running back 1 back then. So only 2 running backs, 1 tight end. Of course, that was Gronk. But the rest of the first round, 9 wide receivers. Here they are. Odell Beckham was wide receiver 1 and the number 1 player overall. Antonio Brown, Julio Jones, DeAndre Hopkins, obviously still a very meaningful player. Amari Cooper. Wow. Talk about a meaningful player.
Wow, there you go.
He won some people, some games, certainly this past weekend. Allen Robinson was wide receiver 6 and 6 overall. So that's 6 straight wide receivers to start the January ADP. After Gronk, it's AJ Green, Todd Gurley, Dez Bryant, Lev Bell, and Mike Evans. Those were the top 12 players just about 8 years ago. And I mean, you hear those names, DeAndre Hopkins, Amari, and Mike Evans.
You could do worse hanging them on your roster for the last 8 years. You might be pretty happy with some of those.
Absolutely. And even Odell, of course, a little bit of a roller coaster for him, especially the past couple of years, but still definitely has some value. Look a little deeper than that. You take a look at the top 24. We get one quarterback. Who was the quarterback one back then, Matt? You remember?
Probably not Brady or Manning or Ben or Breeze, and somebody that ran, I would imagine.
Not somebody that ran. Well, maybe ran a little bit.
That might be a trend, is running quarterbacks now compared to then. We know more about them. Yeah. Vic?
Somebody who ran from the game, Andrew Luck. Andrew Luck was the quarterback.
Oh, that makes perfect sense.
And the only quarterback in the top 24. 4 running backs in the top 24, and Matt, 17 wide receivers. 17 wide receivers. So,
okay.
When we're starting things in 2016, it's really kind of entering the golden age of wide receiver, and that's changed a little bit over the years. That 2017 group of running backs, which included, of course, Christian McCaffrey and Joe Mixon, Alvin Kamara, Dalvin Cook, Austin Eckler, James Conner, even guys like Fournette, Kareem Hunt.
Yeah,
those players shifted things as well. So we've seen the shift in just how different positions are valued over the years. It's always going to be an ebb and flow situation. It looks like this coming rookie class is going to be very weak when it comes to running backs. So we're seeing again the shift back even heavier to more wide receivers, and dynasty teams being built around those receivers, especially young players.
So it's funny. I'm not fighting you at all, but I bet, and I should remember this better than I do, but it's just more of an NFL thing than a dynasty thing, but it overlaps, of course. That 2014 receiver class was great, but then it was kind of a barren wasteland at the wide receiver position in the first round. I mean, in 2015, there was Amari, but Kevin White, Devontae Parker, Nelson Aguilar, Rashad Perryman, Phillip Dorsett, next year, Corey Coleman, Will Fuller, Josh Doxson, Laquan Treadwell, Corey Davis, John Ross, there was 3 or 4 years there where I'm sure many of us were going, I want the next Odell, I want the next Mike Evans, and missing,
Absolutely. And I mean, as impactful as 2014 was with those wide receivers, just getting those guys on our teams and seeing their value rise, their production on a weekly basis, the impact was felt in that way too, that we were chasing those wide receivers for years to come. And as you mentioned, often striking out on those players. And then again, 2017 shifted things again, mostly because of those running backs. But I mean, I think 2017 will go down as the best rookie class of all time. Not only do you have those the running backs that I mentioned, but you've got Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson. You've got George Kittle, plus guys like Evan Ingram and David Njoku, who have been certainly above average. Chris Godwin, Cooper Kupp, even in that class.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, a huge rookie class. 2017 certainly changed things. Another thing that has changed, and I feel like this is more of a recent change, but maybe it's just been a slow and steady change. I feel like those win now windows have changed. And what I mean by that is it feels like we used to join the Dynasty League, and maybe you were content to do that productive struggle that I wrote about back in 2014. You were happy to lose for a year or two if it meant building up a dynasty, and really you felt confident that your league was here to stay. And things change so much and so quickly now that we see leagues come and go within a 2 or 3 year span, and you almost can't afford to wait. So whether it's, whether our patience is growing short, growing thin, we want to win now. We're valuing those veteran players, I think, higher than ever and longer than ever. That's one noticeable change I've seen in recent years, especially.
Okay. Yeah, I could see that. I mean, it's part of it's because there's so many more leagues now that they're less stable. And what's the chance of you being in a league for 10, 20 years or whatever, So
Yeah.
maybe
Yep.
hit it and get while the getting's good,
Very true. The last thing I would throw out here is as a change over the past few years, it's just the league formats. And of course
That was one
we
I
always
wrote
talk.
down. Yeah.
Yeah, we always talk about super flex, and that continues to grow every year. And, potentially maybe it becomes a commonplace. It's probably a commonplace. It's probably a default for a lot of our listeners. But if you think big picture to fantasy or even to dynasty, one quarterback is still the norm, which kind of sounds crazy to me at least, but that is the reality. But all kinds of crazy league formats, unique league formats. I've talked about some of my favorite leagues on here and trying some different things like vampire leagues. I've certainly over the past 8 years, auction leagues have become my thing. I greatly prefer auction to a draft. So that's another thing that has been a change, and I think a positive change to the dynasty space since we've been doing the show, and certainly not just because we've been doing the show, but just something we've witnessed is different league formats growing in popularity. Matt, anything else that was kind of on your list of changes over the past few years?
No, but I want to touch on that last one a little bit. And
Sure.
I always got a kick over the last 8 years, at least twice a year, you would introduce some crazy league you're in. You mentioned the vampire league, the kitchen sink league always comes to mind, like stuff I never would have thought of that you tried that like, wow, that's so cool. And then my wheels start turning, like, how would I attack that? And I assume our listeners did the same. And you're always trying new things, and you're very well versed across the whole dynasty solar system, and it was pretty cool that you'd introduce those things to me. I mean, I'm pretty narrow minded with it and have my other football endeavors, but that was always cool when you'd throw those things out.
Yeah, at least we finally got you in some super flex leagues. I'm gonna,
a little behind on that.
Yeah, I'm going to count that as a win. Matt, we do want to talk about what's next for us and for the dynasty game, and we'll do that next.
So I've told you guys a few times, my kids kind of last minute wanted to go to Steeler games lately. Not too long ago when training camp broke, I wanted to get the Guns N' Roses here in Pittsburgh and had a small window to get something done. And we've all used the Game Time app, and it's worked really, really well. I mean, I fully endorse it. You shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event. I mean, Game Time is the fast and easiest way to buy tickets for all the sports, as I mentioned, concerts, as I mentioned, all musical events, comedy, theater, all those things. I'm going to try to get to a couple comedy things this summer. Last minute deals, all in prices. They have great views from your seat. Their best price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. As I said, there's last minute tickets, flash deals, zone deals. I'll tell you about them in a minute here. All the events in your area. I mean, it's great stuff. So you can see the view from your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect. They have all-in prices, which I really am in favor of. So your total up front. You're not getting hit with some crazy fee at the end. You buy the tickets in a second if you want with just 2 taps. And these flash deals or the zone deals I want to tell you more about. You pick the section, and Game Time picks the seats. So you save on average 18% by doing that. If you just want to be in a certain section, you don't care about the exact seat, you might as well save the 18%. And the Game Time guarantees you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section or row for less, they credit you 110% of the difference. So you actually make money on the deal. So please take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL, all caps, all one word, LOCKEDONNFL, for $20 off your first purchase. I've already done that. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
Well, Matt, we've been talking about how the dynasty game has changed over the last 8 years since we have been doing this show together. I do want to talk about what's next. We kind of told you what's next for us at the top. Although I will be stepping away from the show here not planning on adding anything new or trying to replace this show. And as we said, Kate and Marcus will definitely be holding down the fort. Matt's kind of stuck in between here, but this very well may be the last show for Matt Williamson here on Locked On Dynasty as well. Certainly tune in the rest of this week and next week to find out for sure. Matt, what about changes or what's next when it comes to the Dynasty game? We talked a little bit about the growth of the game. You talked about how it's become really mainstream. I mean, I love it when I'm watching ESPN or listening to, watching NFL Network, something like that. And the Dynasty word comes up, right? When they're talking fantasy football and they mention Dynasty. Of course, Matthew Berry's been a huge part of that, really pushing the Dynasty game for all of us, but others as well. So I'm with you. I think Dynasty continues to grow. I think it continues to occupy a larger and larger space in the overall fantasy football game. What are some other things that you could see changing in the coming years when it comes to Dynasty fantasy football?
One of them's just sort of a positional one that I almost threw out for the last segment because I think we're in the midst of it now. I don't know if it's something changing before our eyes or it already has or it is in the process of. But I mentioned that the summits I used to go to at ESPN, the fantasy summits, and I remember us fighting to no end Eric Ebron's rookie year. I mean, this guy was a top 10 pick, super prospect, and half the room was, you can't ever put a rookie tight end anywhere near the top of the rankings. But he's so special. He's different. Well, I think things have changed now. I mean, I think rookie tight ends, very young tight ends, are hitting the league and bursting on the scene from a receiving standpoint much more than they used to. I mean, this is Trey McBride's second year. Laporta, Kincaid, Pitts as a rookie was over 1,000 yards. That was unheard of when we started the show. You avoided rookie tight ends. And one of your great lessons that I used a lot then was don't draft Evan Ingram or Njoku early in your rookie draft. Go buy him at Thanksgiving, his rookie year. You get him a lot cheaper.
Yeah, and that used to work. It certainly does not work anymore. So that's been, as you said, one of our things that has changed. There was no Kyle Pitts buy low window, at least not anytime close to his rookie year. And the same is going to be true, obviously, for guys like Sam Laporta and Dalton Kincaid. You did have a chance to buy Trey McBride low. Hopefully you took advantage of that sometime last offseason. But I think you're totally right. We are seeing a shift at the tight end position. You still have guys like Hawkinson and Kelsey and Mark Andrews, but just focused on players that are 24 years old or younger. Laporta, Pitts, Kincaid, McBride, all the names you've mentioned. Michael Mayer, Luke Musgrave, Cole Kmet, Jake Ferguson. There's a lot of them, right? There's a lot of them. Even Tucker Kraft has been impressive for the Packers the past month or so. A lot of good young tight ends. Absolutely. Yeah. I think we're seeing kind of the same thing at the quarterback position as well, with some of the young players, rookies and second-year players making a big impact. The quarterback position feels really as deep at the top as it ever has been. I think we're good through, let's say, 14, 15 quarterbacks right now, which feels to me like more depth than we've seen in a while. Talked about the super
especially
flex
if they run, of course. Like Fields, when he wasn't a great quarterback, was a great fantasy asset.
Yeah, very true. Very true. We talked about the super flex settings. I think that continues to grow, and some of the other settings, maybe it's points per first down, or tiered PPR. Those things, again, might be commonplace in your league, but I think they continue to gain space throughout the fantasy game and especially the Dynasty game. Matt, anything else you see changing over the next 2 to 3 years?
I wish I knew. I mean, predicting the future is always hard. And you mentioned, the settings. That was one thing I just wanted to kind of reiterate. I mean, I remember my ESPN days. I'm not quite certain if it was true 8 years ago, but even PPR wasn't like, right. There was a fight over that, PPR, running back just catches a pass and gets 1 yard and he gets a point for that. That's not cool. There was a lot of debate with that.
Yeah, very true. Lots of changes over the last 8 years, lots of more changes coming in the coming years, and big changes here on the Locked On Dynasty podcast. That's going to do it for today's show.
Real quick, not
Please
quite. So,
Yeah.
in terms of changes, Ryan, you've definitely changed the dynasty landscape. I mean, I think that anyone out there will tell you, Twitter's telling us that today. Just know that. And I also wanted to take the opportunity to thank, and this is more of a blueprint thing than Locked On, just the format, but the guests we've had on over all these episodes. I mean, we've had some phenomenal conversations that weren't just you and I.
Absolutely. The Locked On people have been so good to us. All the team there behind the scenes, and definitely have taken care of us. But anytime you start up something brand new and you see it reach some type of success, that always feels good. That's what you and I were able to do, Matt, and it's because of the great guests we had. It is certainly because of my wife, who did all the editing. What did I say? 600 shows almost. She did the editing for every single one of those. So definitely want to thank
I'm glad
her.
we don't live close, because she probably wanted to strangle me about 100 of them.
Probably only 100. And our success, of course, is mostly because of our listeners. We appreciate all the support over the years. We appreciate all the continued support that you can give Matt and I in all of our endeavors. But that is going to do it for today's show. Please make sure you download and subscribe, or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Remember to follow the show at Locked On Dynasty. Follow Matt at Williamson NFL. And I'm Ryan, MC23. Thanks for listening.